It smells like dirty dick in here. Murphy, you've been a bad boy.
Did anybody do their chores today? Fuck, I'm just gonna do it.
Oh shit, you guys, it's 8. Gotta go, Jake's calling. Oh, Jake's calling.
This hour, we are tracking breaking news. Just a moment ago, Moscow police confirmed 4 people were found dead in a home just steps away from the University of Idaho campus.
We begin with breaking news out of North Idaho. Students at the University of Idaho were asked to shelter in place earlier today. The University of Idaho says Moscow police are investigating a homicide on King Road, which, as you can see, is very close to campus. They say police don't have a suspect yet.
Moscow police responded to King Road for a call about an unconscious person Sunday afternoon. When police arrived, they found the 4 deceased students inside the home.
My name is Tara, and this is my channel, True Crime Matters, where I talk about and analyze everything true crime. So today I kind of wanted to switch gears and take some time to talk about a recent case that pretty much everyone is talking about. And that's the case of the 2022 University of Idaho killings and the suspect that is currently in police custody. Now, this case is obviously still developing by the day as more information is brought to light. But that said, I wanted to preface this entire video by stating that despite the evidence that police say they have against the prime suspect, he is still presumed innocent until he's proven guilty in a court of law. Now with that, let's dive right into the case. Now, many of you may know the experience of either going off to college or having a loved one go off to college, and with that, there's a lot of mixed emotions that really come with that experience. On the one end, there's so much hope and excitement and anticipation for the best years of one's life. The idea of really getting close to your life's ambitions and fulfilling your dreams is a truly magical experience. But with that also comes a bit of fear. Fear of the unknown, and especially for many parents, there's a fear of all the dangers that exist in the real world as our young ones fly the coop. And for the families of 4 University of Idaho students, their worst fears would come true on November 13th, 2022. Now, all 4 of these people were absolutely beautiful people. Madison Mogen was a 21-year-old senior attending the University of Idaho. Madison, who went by Maddie, was known for her ability to make others smile and laugh with her offbeat and hilarious sense of humor. Maddie was using her marketing skills to run a social media campaign for the restaurant where she worked, which was called the Mad Greek. Madison excelled in school and all sorts of jobs where she worked all throughout high school and college, amassing a network of friends, colleagues, supervisors, and teachers, all who would not hesitate to give her an amazing reference and remark on just how wonderful she was and just how hard she worked and how much she cared. Now, unfortunately, Madison's best friend since the 6th grade was also a victim. 21-year-old Kaylee Goncalves was described as being both tough and fair, like the ultimate middle child. It was said that she did everything she set her mind to. She didn't hold back in love or in life. She was truly a social butterfly, a wild go-getter, and constantly wanted an adventure. She was one of 5 children. Kaylee, like Maddie, was a senior at the University of Idaho. Now, Kaylee and Maddie had grown up together and were inseparable since the 6th grade. It was described as them being like sisters, and both of them were a big part of the other person's family. 20-year-old Xana Kernodle was another victim who lived in the house with Maddie and Kaylee. Xana was described as being positive, funny, and loved by everyone. She was super lighthearted and always lifted up a room. Xana loved her dog, Shoeshine, I love that name by the way, electronic dance music, and going on family trips. Xana was a junior at the University of Idaho. In December, Xana's family started a memorial endowment in her name to fund scholarships for University of Idaho students. Her family hopes to honor her memory and keep her legacy alive, so I'll add a link below if anyone would like to donate in Xana's name. Now, Xana worked as a server at the Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow for several years along with Maddie, and Xana was dating a guy named Ethan Chapin, who sadly was also a victim. Ethan was just 20 years old and was a freshman at the University of Idaho. He just happened to be sleeping over the same house the girls lived at the night of the attacks. Ethan was a triplet with a brother and a sister and was a lifelong athlete who loved the NFL. He played on the basketball and tennis teams in his high school, and it was said that he was one of the few people that was 100% pure and just an honest, great person.
He was one of the few people that was just, there's nothing bad about him. He was just 100% pure, he was honest, just a great person.
The two worked the Valley's tulip fields together, forming a tight bond. Andrew Miller was Ethan's boss on the farm.
Tulips are a huge part of what it means to be, to grow up and enjoy Skagit Valley. But our youth and our vibrancy, that's our #1 export. You know, we send that all over the world, and I think this is just a way that we can honor that every spring.
So in that spirit, they're planting thousands of tulip bulbs across Conway and Mount Vernon. A living, loving reminder of a life taken away before it could fully bloom.
He'll always be here through the tulips.
So in the spring, they will bloom yellow and white to symbolize joy and peace because of all the positivity he radiated. Now, all three of the girls, Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana, were very close friends, sorority sisters, and also tenants of a 3-story, 6-bedroom, 3-bathroom house they were all renting in Moscow, Idaho. Apparently, the house was sort of near all the sororities and fraternities and was known as being a bit of a party house. In fact, the girls had received 3 noise complaints for loud music for about 4 months leading up to the attack.
How are you?
Good. Is this your place?
Yeah.
Perfect. You know why we're here?
I assume noise.
Noise, yeah.
Yeah.
Big speaker right there?
Yeah.
Nothing against having a party. Once neighbors start calling in, then we have an issue.
Fair.
You go to school?
Yeah.
Okay. What year?
Senior.
Senior. Okay. So I'll tell you the same thing I told them. You probably know the drill, right?
Actually, no.
Oh, okay. So usually, at least for me, I'll give you a verbal warning.
Okay.
Once I have neighbors calling in, your music's too loud, you're disturbing the peace.
Yeah.
Nothing against having parties, nothing against having people over who are overage to drink. But again, once we start disturbing the neighbors, then we've got an issue.
Yeah.
Noise ticket is up to $300.
Yeah, somewhere around $300, $400.
It's a pretty expensive ticket. I don't want to give that to you. That being said, this is your place, so I'm going to hold you responsible.
They get it more expensive the later it gets.
Yeah.
So
We already warned them too, so.
And if I do have to come back here, $300 tickets going to be away.
Okay.
And it only gets more expensive. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. That's
Hey guys, Moscow PD. Hey, turn the music down. Turn the music down. Hey guys, second time. I need somebody to come to the door.
Alright, we'll get someone to come to the door.
Music stays off. Party's over.
Yes, sir.
Hello, miss.
Hello.
What's your name?
Xana.
Xana, do you live here?
Yes.
Okay, did Megan talk to you earlier?
No.
Okay, does Megan live here?
Megan, I do not have a Megan that lives
Megan Mogen?
Maddie Mogen, yes.
Madison Mogen, yeah.
Madison Mogen? Okay, she does live here?
Sorry, she is at the club. She's 21. I'm just going to bed. I have a couple of friends over, but
Okay.
this is my ID.
Have you talked to Maddie tonight?
Yes, I have.
Well-
She's at the corner club.
Okay. Did she tell you anything about anything that happened earlier or anything like that?
Honestly, not really. I've just been here the past hour.
Okay. Okay.
Just trying to go to bed.
Can I grab your ID from me? If
Yeah,
you'll run
I'm
her.
not 21.
Okay.
My roommates are 21. I just came to go to bed.
We're not here to talk about the alcohol stuff, okay?
Okay, yeah.
But this is the second noise complaint we've had here tonight within 2 hours.
I'm sorry
Okay.
about that.
So this time it was the blonde gal and the guy on the back porch playing music. Okay. So
I sincerely apologize about
Okay.
that. I'm just going to bed.
Okay. So just so you understand, you could be getting a misdemeanor citation for this, which means you have to go in front of a judge and explain why you couldn't keep the people in your house quiet.
Okay.
Okay? We've already talked to Maddie once and told her the same thing. Okay? The only reason she's not getting a ticket is because she's not standing here in front of me. But I'm telling you right now, if we have to come back, you're getting a ticket.
Okay, so
and you will have to go see a judge.
I'm fine right now.
You're not getting a ticket right now.
I'm just trying to go to bed right now. I mean, I understand you guys. You're coming here. I'm just going to bed.
Okay.
There were also 2 other female tenants named Dylan and Bethany that were home the night of the attacks but were luckily unharmed. On the evening of November 12th, best friends Maddie and Kaylee ventured out to a local sports bar together called the Corner Club around 10 p.m. They left the bar at around 1:30 a.m. and decided to grab some food from a food truck called the Grub Truck. This truck actually has a live stream video on Twitch which showed Maddie and Kaylee at 1:41 a.m. chatting and smiling, getting their food 10 minutes later, and then getting a ride back to the rental house. The girls then got home, and it's believed they went upstairs to the 3rd floor into Maddie's bedroom. Meanwhile, at around the same time, 1:45 a.m., Ethan and Xana were arriving at the rental property after attending a Sigma Chi party together, a fraternity where Ethan was a member. It is believed they went to Xana's bedroom on the 2nd floor. So by 1:56 a.m., all 4 students were in the home, including the 2 surviving roommates, Dylan and Bethany, who had also returned home by 1 a.m. and went into their rooms. Dylan's room was on the 2nd floor, and Bethany's room was on the 1st floor. Now, from 2:26 to 2:52 a.m., Kaylee made 7 incomplete phone calls to her former longtime boyfriend, Jack. Maddie also then called Jack, but was also unable to get through to him from 2:44 to 2:52 a.m. Meanwhile, Xana and Ethan decided they, were a bit hungry after drinking and apparently ordered some late night food. Xana then received a DoorDash delivery at about 4 a.m. and phone records show that after she got her food, she was using TikTok until about 4:12 a.m. Now, this is right around the time when investigators believe that the attacks occurred. At around 4:15 a.m., surviving roommate Dylan, who was sleeping on the same floor as Xana and Ethan, was awoken by noises of what she thought sounded like Kaylee playing with her dog Murphy. Interestingly, a security camera at a neighbor's residence, which is less than 50 feet from the west wall of Xana's bedroom, did indeed pick up the sound of whimpering, a loud thud, and a dog barking numerous times starting at around 4:17 a.m. The surviving roommate Dylan then heard someone who she initially thought was Kaylee saying something like, "There's someone here." Investigators now believe this could also have possibly been Xana speaking, since they know she was definitely awake and using TikTok on her cell phone at 4:12 a.m., just minutes before the barking and loud thud noise. After hearing these dog noises and someone saying that someone was in the home, their surviving roommate Dylan got out of her bed and opened her door. And she didn't really notice anything odd, so she closed her door and just let a few seconds pass. But then she opened the door a second time, and that's when she heard what sounded like crying coming from Xana's room, while a male voice said, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Surviving roommate Dylan closed her door for a few moments again, but something told her to open the door a 3rd time, and when she did, this time she saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking toward her. Dylan would later describe the suspect as a male that was around 5 feet 10 inches tall, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The man, who the roommate did not recognize, walked past her and used the sliding glass door to exit. Now, it is not known whether this man actually saw Dylan, but she did say as he walked by, she stood there in a frozen shock phase, and then she locked the door to her bedroom. Now, despite all of that, no calls to 911 were made until 11:58 a.m., many hours later, the next day, when one of the roommates called asking for aid of an unconscious person. When police arrived, the door to the home was open and there was no sign of forced entry or damage inside the home, and nothing appeared to be missing. There was an alarm system in the home, but clearly it wasn't being used. The two surviving roommates, Dylan and Bethany, were in the residence when the police arrived, as were other friends of the victims. Apparently, the surviving roommates had called over some friends to the home because they believed one of the second-floor victims was unconscious and not waking up. Now, it has been said that when police walked in to investigate the scene, they were utterly shocked by what they saw. First of all, in this town of Moscow, there had not been a murder for over 7 years. So these officers got quite a shock when they had to walk in on this scene. They have said that this was the worst they had ever seen, that there was literally blood splattered everywhere on the walls and literally oozing outside the house. Investigators said that some people had been on the job 20-30 years and they had never seen anything like it. Xana and Ethan were found in Xana's room on the second floor, while Kaylee and Maddie were found in the same bed together on the third floor. When investigators initially arrived, Kaylee's dog was in her room. Investigators also found a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Maddie's right side. The sheath had K-Bar USMC and the U.S. Marine Corps Eagle Globe and anchor stamped outside of it. All 4 victims were pronounced deceased at 12 noon. Later the evening of November 13th, the university obviously canceled classes for November 14th and scheduled a candlelight vigil to be held. At this point, the whole town was really rattled and terrified, understandably by this. And the police were keeping very quiet about any potential suspects. Many students and other Moscow residents did not trust the police, assuring their safety. Professors began canceling classes because so many students and parents were truly fearful about the fact that this killer was still out there.
People across the country want to know what happened inside this home and why. For those living in Moscow, there's still a lot of fear and uncertainty. And how could there not be? 4 young college students were stabbed to death and their killer still hasn't been caught. Ever since the yellow crime tape went up, the Moscow Police Department has faced scrutiny for not providing as much information about the case as some would like to know.
There's some things that only the people that were at that scene would know. And so you definitely don't want to release that information to the public.
Gary Jenkins is the former chief of Pullman Police and now serves in that role for the WSU Police Department. He says sharing details is a balancing act, keeping people safe and informed without compromising the investigation.
Just trying to make sure that when detectives go out and interview people, it's based on what they know, not what they've heard on the news.
The University of Idaho told students this week they could go home early for Thanksgiving break if they didn't feel safe around campus, and many already have.
The investigation of the stabbings was conducted by the Moscow Police Department, supported by the Idaho State Police. Altogether, 130 members of law enforcement from 3 agencies were working on the case. The coroner conducted autopsies on the 4 victims on November 17th, and she had said that all appeared to have been stabbed multiple times with fatal wounds in the chest and upper body with a large knife.
So in your experience, what is it that you saw when you showed up?
Well, there was a lot of blood. It was a very sad scene with 4 murdered college students.
You're ruling all 4 deaths homicides?
Yes.
Okay. And can you give us a manner of death? Yeah.
I believe that the press release was that they were from a sharp object. So
stabbings.
Yeah, I will know more after the autopsies tomorrow.
And do you believe this could be like a murder-suicide?
No, there are 4 homicides.
At least one victim had what appeared to be defensive stabbing wounds on her hands. But most of the victims may have actually been attacked while they were sleeping. None of the victims showed any signs of sexual assault. No weapon has yet been recovered, although police believe the killer or killers used a fixed blade knife. Right from the get-go, police believed this was a targeted attack. There were even some reports that Kaylee allegedly had a stalker. Now, very interestingly with this case, police kept their cards very, very close to the chest with this one. Weeks and weeks went by, and police really made it seem like they had no leads or no clues. It really started to seem like they were really struggling to find any evidence on who this killer could possibly be. I know that I was personally getting very concerned that they were way out of their league, and this would just wind up, sadly being a cold case.
We understand the public's frustration about not being provided a lot of information. We are working to the best of our ability to actually provide as much as possible. We intend to come out and solicit information from the public if they are within certain areas that we believe are of interest for this investigation.
The families of the victims, especially Kaylee's and Ethan's fathers, were truly frustrated with the limited flow of information from the police and university to the families of the victims. On the other side of the coin, the police were getting frustrated with internet sleuths for creating rampant online rumors which could potentially disrupt the investigation. The police then made it very clear in the press conference that they were not releasing specific details as they did not want to compromise the investigation. That said, it was still appearing as though investigators were really not well equipped to handle a murder case like this. However, on December 15th, 2022, police announced they were searching records of approximately 22,000 fifth-generation Hyundai Elantras that were made between 2010 and 2015. Apparently, it was discovered that a camera in the area of the killings had captured an image of an Elantra around the time when the killings happened. Investigators noticed that the white Hyundai Elantra that was captured by a camera during the time of the killings appeared to be traveling in the direction of Pullman, Washington, and twice to the apartment of the victims. Some surveillance video also showed an Elantra passing by the victim's home 3 times beginning around 3:29 a.m. Then again at 4:04 a.m. the Elantra returned to the home for a 4th time. At 4:20 a.m. the vehicle was seen leaving the victim's neighborhood at a high rate of speed. Investigators ultimately traced the ownership of the vehicle to a local man, Bryan Kohberger, who would later drive the car with his father to the Poconos of Pennsylvania for the holidays, but was pulled over twice within a nearly 5-mile radius by Indiana State Police on Interstate 70 outside of Greenfield, Indiana, for both tailgating and speeding. On both police cam videos of being pulled over, Bryan can be seen as the one driving the car, and in one of the videos, to me, it almost appears that he's either nervous or annoyed when his father says they're coming from Washington State University to head to Pennsylvania.
Hello. How you doing? How y'all doing? Good, good. Take your driver's license real quick if I could. See, he's right up on the van, man. He's right up on the back of that van. Go over for tailgating. Is this your car? Okay, cool. Where you headed?
Well, we're coming from WSU, and we're scanning early.
What's WSU?
University, basically. That is SWAT team area.
So I'm having a hard time reading it because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University, and you're going there? Oh.
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
We're slightly much driving hours.
Hours, days.
Hours driving. Well, almost.
Okay.
Investigators had also retrieved cell phone data that showed that Kohberger's phone stopped connecting to the network around 2:47 a.m. in Pullman on November 13th before reconnecting around 4:44 a.m. near Blaine, Idaho, which is just south of Moscow. Now, to me, this part is especially chilling. Cell phone data also shows that Bryan actually was near the victim's residence around 9 a.m. on November 13th, so about 5 hours after the killings. He was there again. It would appear he returned to the residence, but it's not clear why. Police also found cell phone data that indicated that he was near the residence at least 12 other times between June 2022 and November 13th. So this does seem to indicate that if the students were not having him over in the past for parties, he may have been stalking either one or more of the residents. Luckily, investigators were able to obtain a sample of DNA from the crime scene that did not belong to any of the victims. The DNA was found on a tan leather knife sheath which was left on Madison's bed. Now, this part is fascinating, and hopefully this type of thing just gets stronger over time so more and more cases can be solved more quickly. Apparently, investigators were able to take this DNA sample from the sheath to search a public genealogy database, and it was through that DNA database search that authorities identified a partial match to an individual with a family connection to Bryan Kohberger. Now, all of this was happening right around when Bryan left Idaho with his dad to go back to his parents' home in the Poconos, Pennsylvania, for the holidays. Bryan's father would later say that this was actually due to his parents being concerned for Bryan's safety after the murders. Although police were not saying a peep to the families or the media, they actually already had Bryan under surveillance around the week of Christmas. During that time, multiple times investigators observed Bryan wearing surgical gloves to clean every inch of the interior and exterior of his white Elantra. They also saw Bryan putting his garbage bags inside the garbage bags of a neighbor at around 4 a.m. early one morning, which apparently wasn't even that close to their home, so he had to go quite a bit of a distance to put his trash out with the neighbor's trash. It was one of these items that Bryan threw away that investigators would try to retrieve in order to find saliva or hair samples. A sample of Kohberger's father's DNA from the trash was sent away for processing to the Idaho State Lab. The sample showed with more than 99% certainty that he was the father of the person whose DNA was on the knife sheath left at the crime scene, which was the final piece of the puzzle that authorities needed for an arrest warrant, which was issued on December 29th. On December 30th, 2022, an FBI SWAT team and Pennsylvania State Police arrived at the home of his parents in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. Bryan was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 felony count of burglary. He was appointed a public defender and detained without bond at the Monroe County Correctional Facility in Pennsylvania. On his return to the Monroe County Courthouse on January 3, 2023, he agreed to extradition. On January 4th, he was flown to Idaho, where he was held without bail. Kohberger made his first appearance on January 5, 2023, and was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary for breaking into a home with the intent to commit a felony.
Count 1 of the criminal complaint charges you with the felony offense of burglary. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did unlawfully enter a residence located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder, in violation of Idaho Code 18-1401 and 1403. The maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is not less than 1 year in prison, no more than 10 years in prison, and or a $50,000 fine or both. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 2 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogen, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. The maximum penalty for this offense, if you were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 3 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Goncalves, a human being, by stabbing Kaylee Goncalves, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is death and/or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 4 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing Xana Kernodle, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and/or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 5 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing Ethan Chapin, from which he died, in violation of Idaho Codes 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. And again, the maximum penalty for this offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
At this point in time, pursuant to Idaho Criminal Rule 46B and Idaho Code 19-816 and 2903, I am going to leave the bail set of this case as no bail at this point in time until I have additional or further information at a later date and time.
1 week later, on January 12, 2023, Kohberger made his second appearance for a status conference. A preliminary probable cause hearing was scheduled for June 26, 2023, and of course we will be covering everything in the future with this case. Now, what do we actually know about the suspect, Bryan? Well, we're finding out more and more details by the day. Bryan Kohberger was born on November 21st, 1994 in Albrightsville and grew up and lived in the Allentown, Bethlehem Eastern area of Pennsylvania for most of his life. His parents were originally natives of Brooklyn, New York, and while there have been conflicting reports in regards to Bryan's upbringing, it is understood that he grew up in a fairly supportive environment. Both of his parents worked for the local school district. His father, Michael Jr., was a maintenance worker from 2006 to June 2019, and his mother, Marianne, assisted special needs students until around COVID hit in 2020. Bryan's family are very active members of the church, and it was there, they said, that Bryan developed strong ties to his religious faith, which they say he maintained even after going to college. All of that said, apparently Bryan did not have the best experience in school as he grew up. It's been reported that he was described as a chubby misfit and that he was tortured by popular girls in his middle school. A former 6th grade crush named Kim has told the FBI that Bryan became relentless in his pursuit for her, repeatedly leaving love letters in her locker and telling her he liked her. Now, in response to all of this, Kim would tell him to leave her alone and would not give him the time of day. It was also said by other classmates that after Bryan was bullied in school, he would later become a bully himself. One of Bryan's childhood friends named Thomas spoke out describing Bryan as mean in high school, saying that it was then that Bryan started being very eager to be seen as dominant. Another friend, Nick, confirmed this, and Nick said he and Bryan had been friends during their teenage years, and that they both spent half their days at high school and then the other half taking heating and air conditioning work classes at Monroe County's vocational school. But the relationship dissolved after Nick said that Bryan underwent a huge personality shift over the course of the summer. Nick said that Bryan had been this down-to-earth and overweight teen when they wrapped up junior year, but when they started their senior year, Bryan was way thinner, like thinner than a rail, and had developed an extremely aggressive personality. Bryan also began picking up boxing lessons and was itching to put these new skills to use. Nick said that ultimately him and his friends had to cut Bryan off from the friend group because he was 100% a different person. This friend Nick added that the personality switch came as a total surprise and mystery to the other friends. Now, around this time, another former acquaintance of Bryan named Rich claimed that him and Bryan were friends and they worked together at a pizzeria. He said of Bryan that he was a little socially awkward, but he wasn't a bad guy. He said that it was widely known Bryan never had dated any girls and didn't really have many friends. But Rich also went on to claim that him and Bryan were also both heroin addicts and they both used drugs together. Another former female student had stated that she had given Bryan a ride around town once, only to find out later it was actually helping him in his search to pick up heroin. It is widely known that any form of substance abuse can trigger or intensify feelings of loneliness, sadness, and hopelessness that is associated with depression. More recently, some social media posts have come to light that Bryan allegedly made from ages 14 to 17 that are shining a light on what really may have been going on in his head at that time. In many of them, Bryan describes how he believes he has a condition called VSS, or visual snow syndrome, which is a super uncommon neurological condition. Symptoms may involve flashes of light or seeing things that the brain is supposed to tune out.
Visual snow is a disorder where patients see a type of TV static in their vision, so it's almost like they have millions of tiny little dots in their vision all the time, and it's throughout their visual field.
Symptoms may involve flashes of light or seeing things that our brain is supposed to tune out, like eye floaters or after images.
Perhaps they'll look at a TV or some words on a piece of paper, and as they start to look away, they still see shadows left over, these after images, and it can almost create like a double vision or a feeling that words are moving when they're trying to read.
These types of symptoms can be distracting by themselves. However, some people also suffer from additional symptoms, such as dizziness, headaches, or ringing in the ears. While many people who experience visual snow are born with it, there can be secondary causes.
Some patients might notice this coming on after an event, like a head injury or a really severe infection or illness.
There's no treatment for it, and it's so unusual that it's not really well understood. Now, obviously, any one of those symptoms alone can contribute to feelings of frustration, anxiety, and depression. And most of us remember that being a teenager was a completely confusing time as we awkwardly grew into ourselves. It's a pretty normal teenage experience to have some schoolyard riffs and drama with friends. And that experience can leave us feeling extremely isolated sometimes. So knowing that, remember that Bryan was not really described as being a normal teen. He was actually described as being pretty abnormal. So between being bullied, having a neurological condition, and having a substance abuse issue, this does seem like a pretty tormented individual. And indeed, the social media posts he did make describe more than just typical teenage depression. He describes himself as having horrible depersonalization, as if he's living in a video game and he's not real. He describes that he feels his brain chemistry could be off, that he has constant thoughts of delusions of grandeur, and no emotion. He says he is mean to his family, and it started when this visual snow syndrome started. He writes on that his family group hugs and celebrates, and he feels completely devoid of any emotion, saying, "As I hug my family, I look into their faces and I see nothing. It's like I'm looking at a video game, but less." In December of 2011, when Bryan had just turned 17 years old, he posted, "The ringing in my ears and the fuzz in my vision is simply all of the demons in my head mocking me. I fall asleep, but I wake up quickly to bloody screams. I simply don't want to live anymore." Around the same time, Bryan began posting that he believed visual snow is caused by toxins. And this was around the time that Bryan became a very strict vegan. One relative of Bryan would even say that Bryan went above and beyond going vegan, and that his family had to buy all new pots and pans because he would simply not eat from anything that had ever had meat cooked in it ever. And they also stated that Bryan seemed very OCD. Even with all of this turmoil going on, Bryan was able to ultimately graduate from high school and later went on to earn an associate's degree in psychology from Northampton Community College in 2018. It was around this time that Bryan began working as a security officer for the same school district both of his parents worked at for years, but he had just recently left the job last year. In 2020, he earned his bachelor's degree from DeSales University, where he studied in part under forensic psychologist Catherine Ramsland, the author of The Mind of a Murderer, The Psychology of Death Investigations, How to Catch a Killer, and 65 other books. A fellow associate professor at DeSales University in Pennsylvania described Bryan as a great writer and a brilliant student. She said in her 10 years of teaching, she has only recommended 2 students to a PhD program, and he was one of them. She added that Bryan was one of her best students ever, and that everyone in the school is in shock over this. In fact, his associate professor was who taught Bryan in an online class last year and helped him with his master thesis at DeSales. She noted that she never actually saw Bryan in person. Her only interactions with him were via email or Zoom, but she said that he seemed normal to her and that she was stunned overhearing the news that he was considered a suspect. She said that she advised Bryan with his graduate thesis, which involved questioning people about their thoughts and feelings during the commission of a crime. And indeed, there is a post from Reddit that Bryan made in May of 2022 asking for information to help a research project that seeks to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. In criminology, it's a normal thing to study called script theory on how and why criminals commit a crime. Bryan then later received a Master of Arts in Criminal Justice from DeSales University in 2022, and around that time enrolled as a doctoral student at Washington State University in Pullman. Around this time, Bryan also applied for an internship at Pullman Police Department just recently this past fall of 2022, which would have been right around the time when the murders took place, just 4 miles away from the crime scene. Some classmates who had seen him in their classes around the time of the murders said that his behavior was noticeably changed after the murders. One classmate described how he would go from perpetually exhausted to chattier. Now that said, new details have just emerged this week around February 10th of 2023 that indicate that Bryan was actually terminated from his teaching assistant job at WSU due to his erratic behavior both before and after the killings occurred. Apparently less than 2 weeks prior to the murders, Bryan was called into a meeting with the university faculty to discuss their growing concerns over his behavior. According to record, the university had to follow a timeline and meetings, essentially a performance improvement plan, to justify its decision to terminate him. It was said that some female students reported that Bryan had made them feel uncomfortable, seeming to give them harsher grades than some of the male students. One female student even claimed that Bryan had followed her to her car. It has also come to light that Bryan had an altercation on September 23rd with John Snyder, the WSU professor that Bryan was assisting. In the actual termination document, university officials described a second altercation that Bryan had with this same professor after the killings. Later that month, the department decided to remove him from his position as a teaching assistant, cutting off his pay and saying that he had, quote, not made progress regarding professionalism, end quote. Bryan's downstairs neighbors, who lived just beneath him up until his arrest, said that while they never saw Bryan much, they had noticed that it seemed like Bryan never slept and looked too weak to kill. One thing the neighbor did mention, though, that I found particularly interesting, aside from the not sleeping part, was that the neighbor mentioned that Bryan would often be up late vacuuming, late hours of the night at around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, about the victims he is accused of killing, Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. It's unclear if any of them had actually interacted with Bryan prior to the murders, but allegedly a now deleted Instagram account that appeared to once belong to Bryan followed all 3 of the female victims. In fact, he had repeatedly messaged one of the girls just 2 weeks prior to the attacks, but she never replied. It's not even clear on whether she actually saw the messages, since they may have been in the message request section. Among some of the newer evidence being brought to light is that among new items being seized from Bryan's apartment after his arrest were a stained mattress cover, a disposable black glove, receipts from Walmart and Marshall's, a computer tower, a vacuum dust container, Fire TV stick, and several hair samples, including one possible animal hair strand. Police also now for sure know that Bryan's phone records show that just about 5 hours after the murders at 9 a.m., Bryan did indeed return between 9:12 a.m. and 9:21 a.m. He then returned home to his apartment in Pullman at 9:32 a.m. and later went grocery shopping at 12:46 p.m. Bryan's public defender has stated that Bryan is eager to be exonerated of these charges and looks forward to resolving these matters as promptly as possible. Kohberger's family has released a statement which reads, "First and foremost, we care deeply for the 4 families who have lost their precious children. There are no words that can adequately express the sadness we feel, and we pray each day for them. We will continue to let the legal process unfold, and as a family we will love and support our son and brother. We have fully cooperated with law enforcement agencies in an attempt to seek the truth and promote the assumption of innocence rather than judge unknown facts and make assumptions. We respect privacy in this matter as our family and the families suffering loss can move forward through the legal process." Just this last year, Bryan's mother had penned an emotional letter denouncing violence, specifically school shooting tragedies. She wrote, "As I sat this morning reeling from yet another school shooting, I found myself wrestling with which actions need to be taken to stop all this madness." Interestingly, Bryan has 2 sisters, Amanda and Melissa, who both work as mental health workers. Amanda is a licensed school counselor who also starred in a 2011 slasher film called 2 Days Back about a group of friends who walk in the woods and soon find themselves in danger. Bryan's other sister, Melissa, is a licensed associate counselor. Now, as each day passes, we are learning more and more new information, obviously, on this case. So, obviously, some of this information will be shifting and evolving over time as the story develops. But I wanted to give my opinion on a few things and raise some questions with all of you guys. While Bryan is just a suspect at this time, to me, it seems that there is some pretty damning evidence mounting that points to how he could have committed a crime such as this. A lot of times with mass shooters and serial killers, we do see this recurring theme of them first feeling suicidal. And so this tends to make people wonder, okay, well, then why don't you just kill yourself if you're suicidal? Why hurt other people? And well, many of them are also dealing with narcissistic traits, delusions of grandeur that they somehow were personally chosen to rid the world of what they view to be evil or wrong. We also see that they often feel detached from reality or void of emotion, which Bryan clearly makes mention of in his teenage posts. When these killers are particularly smart too, they tend to want to study their own conditions to better understand how their own mind works. I remember seeing this with James Holmes, the Aurora movie theater mass shooter, who was taking graduate courses in neuroscience just before dropping out of school weeks before his crime. We have also heard folks describing Bryan as an incel, which is a person, usually a man, who regards himself or herself as being involuntarily celibate and typically expresses extreme resentment and hostility towards those who are sexually active. As we do know, not one woman has come forward saying that they have dated Bryan, so one can make the assumption that he has likely never dated a woman. Bryan has also been described as being quite OCD between having his family members get all new pots and pans, but also the fact that his downstairs neighbor pointed out that he was vacuuming all hours of the night, which struck me as kind of odd. I mean, not to be sexist, but most bachelors don't even own a vacuum, and those who do probably don't use it much, especially not all hours of the night. That is a very OCD behavior. Now, OCD is tough to deal with, and it's something that makes people feel so uncomfortable when something is not perfect as they see it. And it can actually cause these people to potentially become abusive or lash out just because of whatever is making them feel like it's not in their eyes the way it needs to be in order for them to feel safe or their world to be okay. Now, if Bryan was also always wanting to dominate, as said by old classmates in the school, that does seem to fit, especially since he went for jobs such as being a security guard. But did Bryan study psychology and criminology to try to understand how his own mind was working? Or was it more of a way for him to study his field so that he could potentially become one of the best serial killers of all time? I immediately was reminded of Ted Bundy. Although Ted was certainly not an incel, he was extremely charming to women. But there's this same common narcissistic thread of wanting to work in criminology and with the law to be able to play the game best. And as Bryan described himself, he was beginning to see life as a video game from pretty early on in his teenage years. Maybe he just wanted to know everything and wanted to know what the police knew so that he could be the very best. And another thing, if Bryan was who did this and he killed those 4 students, why would he not kill everybody in the house, especially Dylan, who was standing and saw him? Did Bryan see her? My theory is that Bryan actually did not see Dylan looking at him. We don't know how dark the hallway was, or how dark inside Dylan's room was, or how dark the kitchen was, so it's possible that the darkness was in all the right places, which made it hard for him to see her. Plus, I'm wondering if he really does have this visual snow syndrome, and it makes it really hard for him to see clearly at night. Or it could have been that he knew he was running out of time, and maybe he was just kind of taken back that there was somebody actually standing and looking at him when he was expecting to kill people in their sleep. I'm not really sure that we'll ever know. And speaking of the surviving roommate Dylan, specifically her not reporting the murders immediately that night. Now, Dylan has really faced a lot of criticism in that the affidavit clearly states that she heard noises and crying and saw a figure in black leaving the home. And I just wanted to offer that none of us really know how we will react in times of high stress. It's very possible she had been going through some anxiety issues, or maybe she was under the influence and she thought she wasn't really seeing what she was seeing. It could have been any number of things that all she could do in that moment was just protect herself in her room. I will say that I had an experience where I did feel a frozen shock phase, so I can say I know what it feels like to be frozen. I was about 18 or 19 years old, and we had somebody living in our home with us who later, this person was diagnosed as a schizophrenic. Anyway, he would very rarely have extremely violent episodes and outbursts. And one night I came home from work with my sister, and I had gone to bed and I put my earphones on, and suddenly I heard loud banging and slamming coming from the kitchen. And I remember being so frozen I wasn't even able to turn the volume down on my headphones because I was so terrified about what the heck was going on. I thought somebody had entered the home at night and just started like destroying our property. I didn't even realize it was the person that lived with us. And I remember it was 23 years ago, and I can remember like it was yesterday. I had to take all the energy within my body just to be able, I said to myself, Tara, all you have to do is just get out of bed and just lock your door. That's all you gotta do. But that took me a good minute to be able to get myself out of my bed, to get, maybe 2 feet to lock my door and just protect myself. And even then, I didn't call 911. I had my cell phone, and I could not even function to the point of doing much else. So I describe it as a deer in headlights thing, where you really are shocked with fear. So I can tell you the frozen shock phase is a real thing, and none of us know how we'd react. It's an awful, awful experience. And to that poor girl, and that poor girl also could have potentially seen something that morning. looking down the hall, because from the affidavit, the arriving officer says that he could see Xana's door was actually open and he could see her body on the floor. But I just really hope everyone and all the families involved are getting the counseling that they need to process this. This is not something that human beings can process on their own. And I just wish them lots of strength at this time. And even for Bryan's family, I grew up being the child of a prisoner, so I do know what it's like for a society to look at you as if you're an extension of the criminal, or you're somehow in the same category as the perpetrator. And yes, there are families that are sometimes all involved in crimes, but most times they are not. They are just very nice people. And Bryan's family, if he did this, they could just be very, very nice people that have a very sick and violent child. Not an excuse by any means, because if their son did this, he needs to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But if Bryan did this, were there signs ahead of time? I think there were. But as humans, regardless of education level or intelligence, we tend to try to rationalize or ignore suspicious behavior when it's happening in our lives. We just don't want to believe that it could happen to us. And for some reason, we want to believe that crimes happen to other people. But even still, with those signs, were there enough signs to actually assume that he would eventually one day murder people? I don't know. What do you guys think? Did Bryan do this? Do you think that he saw Dylan and let her live for some reason? How do we prevent more crimes like this? Do we just keep trying to educate people and report people and hope things get better? Please add your thoughts to the comment section down below, and as always, thank you so much for watching.